We were one of the earliest in the mobile advertising space at the time when we came in. And it was probably going to be easy for us to just stay in as an India only player. But we soon realized that we are actually going after internet. We're going after global internet, and this phenomena of advertising is not just contained within the boundaries of India. If you actually push yourself a little bit, this phenomena is going to be a pillar of the global internet.
Welcome to X Unicorns, a podcast brought to you by Blume Ventures. Blume is one of India's premier homegrown early-stage venture capital funds. If you're asking yourself what in the world is an X-Unicorn, rewind to episode 1 where we share the origins of the term X-Unicorns. We promise it'll be worth your time. In this series of conversations, we want to look back and celebrate founders and startups that have entered and are soon entering the X-Unicorn Club. Stories of founders that have played it by their rules and taken unconventional or even long drawn-out paths to get there. In today's episode, we have Naveen Tewari, founder and CEO of InMobi Group, in conversation with Sanjay Nath, co-founder and managing partner at Blume Ventures.
Hi, everyone. Today in this episode of X Unicorns, it's my pleasure to host a very special guest, Naveen Tewari, who is the founder and CEO of InMobi. Interestingly, as many of you may know, InMobi was India's first ever unicorn and also created Glance, another unicorn in and of itself. So it's really special to have a founder here, Naveen, who's created 2 unicorns under a common umbrella. Before we segue and dive deep into this podcast, I wanted to share a few personal notes on why it's special to have Naveen here today. Interestingly, Naveen wanted to do this in person. And as it turns out, I'm back in San Francisco, just a couple of blocks away from your InMobi San Francisco headquarters. So the next time we do it, we'll definitely plan to do it in person in one continent, one country, in one place. Just wanted to add a personal note here on the intro and the relevance. Some of you may remember that InMobi was one of the first investments of the Mumbai Angels way back in 2009 to 2010, which is interestingly also where Karthik Reddy and I first met more than a decade ago. It was my very first personal angel investment, where I'm still a small and early supporter. Naveen's return from US to India to become a founder also inspired me, as I was extremely intrigued by the very nascent India story back then and why Indian founders were leaving their well-paid jobs and taking an early risk around the massive, but still then very unproven India promise. I have to say, Naveen, that you've played a key role in my own return to India to spend time with Karthik more than a decade ago, and helped kick off my own internal story and visioning being an India-focused early-stage investor and of co-founding Blume. So as we dive in, I would like to say that our audience would love to hear about not just the story, but also the inflection points, the pivots, and the learnings in your journey, Naveen, including personal anecdotes, because a lot of those learnings come from those stories, and would love to hear your storytelling here. So let's dive right in. Welcome, Naveen.
Thank you, Sanjay. And I must say, the reason why, InMobi exists, a big part of it goes back to you for supporting us at the time at which there wasn't really a funding environment for backing early stage companies. Now, of course, you have taken that and institutionalized it with Blume, but to be able to do that for us meant a lot to me personally and to the company. It was a huge risk. So I just want to genuinely thank you for this. And I'm very excited to actually be coming on this podcast. It'll be exciting, fun conversation to have with you.
Thanks, Naveen. Much appreciate the kind words. Let's take a walk down memory lane and go back to those formative years. I'll call it the Kanpur to Harvard phase of your journey. I know you were born to a family with IIT Kanpur heritage. Your father was a professor and other members of the family. Would love to hear your thoughts. How did they influence your decision to study and be who you are, and then also aspire to go abroad after IIT? Just walk us back through those years.
I love the phrase you used, Kanpur to Harvard. I love to talk about that place no matter what. As you rightly said, I was born in a family of academicians. My grandmother was a professor. My father was a professor. My uncle was a professor. Aunt was a professor. Everybody, father-in-law was a professor. So everybody in my family has been a professor. So education and the importance of it was very deeply ingrained into the system, in the society, in the air around there. So there was a lot of value attached to education. It was a thing that I think our family had done for generations. So when at some point of time I decided not to do it, I almost felt that I had to carry on with the family heritage. to essentially be an educator. I think I almost decided to be an educator, despite maybe not being a good one. I think it was my father who basically told me, why are you doing this? The world's changed. You should go out and do something different. I didn't understand it because I wasn't as aware of what the world changes are looking like. But I think the education was very deeply ingrained into our system. Kanpur is a mid-tier town, very deeply into UP. And so the changes that were happening in the world were not necessarily that visible. And that was a motivation as you were growing, because you would hear about other places and about countries internationally which were growing very differently. And you just wanted to make a very small, limited change by your own self. And I think that was the biggest driving force, or one of the driving forces, I would say. And so when you got out of Kanpur, you really saw that the world's changed and changing. And the thing that became very core to me was to say, if it could be done throughout the world, then why could somebody coming from a smaller town not do this? And I think that became a thing to prove to myself and maybe to a larger community of people who always thought that the big things are not done by people from small town and big things are not done by things from middle class. And I think that was just an interesting view of life that at least I had.
Very interesting, Naveen. Let's cross the ocean from Kanpur and let's go to the Charles River, to your Boston days. It's interesting. I've observed that when one has brands and logos, in your case, McKinsey, Charles River Ventures, and then Harvard Business School, the opportunity cost and leaving and trying something different is much harder when one has nothing. In one of your interviews, you talked about in your late 20s, you don't leave everything to try and build something small. Would love to hear what was going through your mind as India was very early and you had these brands and these great businesses under your belt. What is going through your mind, those early seeds of entrepreneurship?
Yeah, look, it's very interesting because I think you start your life in order to essentially hope to be associated with these brands or these brands to be associated with you. And once you get it, then you find yourself a little hollow because you work hard to get to the brand and then you don't know what do you do now. And I think this sense of I must get into IIT and you did, and then I must get to McKinsey, you did, and then I must get to Harvard, you did. Okay, now I got here and it's phenomenal. I don't want to sound arrogant at all. It was huge and there's a massively big brands. You realize that you're still not happy. You're still not satisfied. And the question that was intriguing me is to say, okay, why am I not happy? Why am I not satisfied? What am I trying to do or prove that I'm not happy or satisfied? Every one of us, we work hard to get to these phenomenal places. So the question that hits you is to say, okay, what next? Once you get there, the question again comes back, what am I doing here? What should I try to do? And how can I use my time a little better? And I think that question, that intrigue never stopped in my view till you reached a point to say, people who really matter, in my view, were the ones who create the future. And if you create the future and not just define a future or not just talk about the future, you got to go create it. And creation is hard, is very hard. So if you can go create a future, then there may be something that you're doing which is changing the way the world is. And I think that became an important aspect of things as I went through these several years of these phenomenal brands. And that's where the whole India point also came in. I've always been a big fan of our country and its potential and its people in all aspects. And maybe at times not logically, you don't need to be logically accurate to essentially go after things. You need to be just passionate about them to begin with. And so there came a point of time where, as you thought about creation, India kept on coming back. And it's like, okay, maybe if this was to be done for India, from India, it may have a different meaning. Of course, realizing at least at that point of time or thinking at that point of time, it may not be as meaningful just because of the size and scale of it. I think that part certainly got proven wrong because India has just flourished to a different level. But if you go back at that point of time, I think it was the quest to essentially create something and a quest to have a purpose in life that was not as well defined maybe as it is today, or I can articulate it much better today. But I think this emptiness on one hand and the need to have a purpose on the other hand led to essentially going for things. There's a time when I was at McKinsey where I used to work for Reliance Infocom, and Infocom was getting launched, and I would watch Ambani from a distance build his telecom empire. And Reliance was a giant already by that point of time. And here was this person who was working 18 hours, 20 hours a day to create something. And it was just the most fascinating thing I'd ever seen in my life of how to think about creation and how to essentially even go about doing it. And he did it. And he did it. Of course, he repeated that with Geo later on. Clubbed with all of this, like watching him, you always wanted to be in his position versus being an advisor to him or creating documents. Those things are nice and important, but they're not the ones where you're really creating, because creation is not about knowledge and something. It's about taking that decision, taking that risk with very limited information and going into the unknown.
This is very interesting, Naveen. I think you've touched upon the hard things about hard things, and you all have come so far, but it's very interesting. You go back and you're digging deep into emotions. I wanted to touch upon two aspects you talked about: creation and inspiration. If you can share a bit about your co-founders, how did you all persuade each other to join the bandwagon? Often I found that it's easier sometimes to convince investors than your co-founders, because you all are putting your lives in each other's hands versus an investor, yes, putting part of our lives, but mainly our money and our platform. How did you all come together? And also at such a young age of starting, who are your inspirations? You talked about Mr. Ambani, but then back in Boston in the cross-border, how do you all come together? And who are some inspirational role models that you could look up to and said, I want to, if not emulate them, at least draw inspiration from?
Yeah, look, I think from an inspiration point of view, there is inspiration that you draw from people that you see up close. And then there is inspiration that you draw from the stories that you hear about some people. Watching people up close are the ones who are creating new things, and you can see them create. You see the journey. So with Mr. Ambani, I was able to see his journey only maybe for 2 years, but you saw the journey. You saw that even somebody like him would have a low day and a high day, and he would still like chug along, create something, but he was always focused on something massive. And so those are inspirations that you see from close quarters. And then there are these inspirational stories, which are, of course, the story of Infosys, story of Wipro. All of those are like putting India on the map. And it felt like I'm not a sportsman, but if I were one, these are the things that you want to be associated with, where the India flag is flying high if India were to win a game, and the Indian flag would basically be out there. So those are the kind of things that I would say really, at least to me, were very powerful and impactful from an inspiration point of view. One thing that I realized was I was always very intrigued by people who were creating things. That was a realization that I had. It was not about running things. It's not about managing things. It's about creating, because creation as a process was just like beautiful. It's beautiful. It's hard. You go wrong, but it's beautiful. And so therefore, I think creating the future became thing which unknowingly, probably I would say today, unknowingly at that point of time was like very core to me. And I was getting attracted to people who were just creating stuff. Now, coming back to a very important question you just asked, which is about my co-founders. You have to go back to the context of when we were starting up, right? In 2007-ish and 2008 and all of that time frame. There was no concept of a startup. There was no concept of any success or failure. And so we'd never actually talked about, hey, we'll make this into a big company or a unicorn or that sort. We just came together because I think somewhere everybody was searching for a purpose that was going to be meaningful to them individually. Because I think that age that we were in, we all realized that we would do no matter what. But is there a sense that we could try and fulfill a purpose and go after something that's not been done before? And I would say whether it was Abhay, who I first interacted with, and he'd been actually, to be fair, he's been one of those who had been a co-founder since we were at undergrad together. He had already founded one company and hadn't succeeded. And so when I met him, I would always look up to that guy because he had created a company at the time when I was searching for safety. Like, talk about the risk profile difference between him and me, and the ability for him to take risk when he was in college itself. And he's never done a job till date, frankly. And when I met him, he had just shut his company down. He sat down with me and I said, so what are you thinking of doing? And he said, I'm going to start a new company. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Your previous one just shut down and you're telling me that you're going to start again. He said, it's amazing. And there was nothing materially amazing about that sentence of his. What was amazing about that sentence of it was the depth of passion that he had for creation. And that was just like magnetic, I would say. It was so magnetic. It was like, oh God, like I am thinking. And I have every possible brand on myself, patched onto a F1 race driver. And here is this guy who's going to go at it again, hasn't necessarily earned money because he never worked anywhere, and he's going to go for it again. Like, why would I not be doing this? Same was true with my other two co-founders, Amit and Mohit. They were all about, hey, if there is an interesting thing that we could all do, when would we do this? So maybe I was half convinced of doing things myself. But the other half of it was basically came from watching some of these people, their passion also to essentially create. And you suddenly realize that, wait a minute, even if you were to fail, this is a very interesting thing to go for. And I think that's how I would put it. The importance of the co-founders at that point of time and even today is about connecting at a deeper emotional level, not necessarily at the, hey, you bring this, I bring that, etc. on the table, because the journey is too long and hard. And it's not necessarily about complementarity of skills, but somewhere compounding of passion and compounding of trust. That's far more important. And I think that's continued to stay for us in these last 15 years of having run a company.
This is very interesting. If somebody just dropped into the last 2 minutes, you've talked about some very interesting words. One is creation is beautiful. And it's almost a work of art, right? You have to really enjoy it, which is what I'm taking away from it, besides creating value and impact and making wealth creation for all the stakeholders. And the second is also on how your co-founders and all of you have also quasi-inspired each other, right? You said you've taken inspiration from Mr. Ambani and the others before you've been there, done that, but also how with complementary personalities, you all inspired each other. Very interesting. I wanted to segue into scaling, something that's also dear to your heart. I was just looking at one of your interviews where, especially with the pivot and addition of Glance, you talk about, you and Piyush talk about owning the crowded streets of the internet and constantly looking to scale. I think these numbers have been surpassed now, but the numbers I dug up from some time past were Glance is more from 400,000. The target was to be on 1 million devices. And then Roposo from 100,000 to 1 million concurrent users. I think here would love to hear your thoughts on how you think of scale, both at your level, Piyush's, the co-founders level, and when you look at your P&Ls, maybe acquisitions. Just what do you think about scale, both in terms of strategy and how everybody inside InMobi thinks about scale?
Yeah, it's a very important question. One of our big tenets that all of us actually carry around as co-founders and actually at large within the company is think big and being entrepreneurial. What that means is that we really want to go and try and build big things. And scale becomes an important aspect of it. So as we thought about advertising, we were one of the earliest in the mobile advertising space at the time when we came in. And it was probably going to be easy for us to just stay in as an India-only player. But we soon realized that we are actually going after internet. We're going after global internet, and this phenomena of advertising is not just contained within the boundaries of India. If you actually push yourself a little bit, this phenomena is going to be a pillar of the global internet. And today we are one of the top few players in the open internet space on advertising. And we take a lot of pride in that because we have built that business brick by brick and have built it from a very different part of the world. And it's a very deeply technical space. People used to believe that India may not be able to create deep products, but I think we've shown with that. And so as advertising business saw of ours, and we realized that business is going to certainly scale quite significantly, we wanted to essentially think about how we could actually also build consumer-facing businesses which are unique, which have not been created before. We didn't want to go and create yet another something else, which has been done before and copy it and do it. Not by that I have anything against it. It's just who we are. We just wanted to create something new. And that has its own challenges because people don't really accept it to begin with. I remember back in 2008 and 9, when you backed us, that was very hard for anybody else to back us on the advertising space because everybody thought that there is no advertising that will be possible on mobile phones. But that's not the case today. It's actually the largest space in the world in about 10 to 12 years henceforth. Similarly, I think when we looked at Glance, we said, hey, we should create something new. We should create a new consumption platform. We should create a new form of internet. We should create an internet on the lock screens. We should create the internet on the surfaces. And nobody had done it before. And we're at it for years before we came out with it. And I think it's been phenomenal because I think our scale on that is already crossing about 500 million phones now carry Glance on their phones. And therefore, it's soon enough. Maybe in about a year or two, we would be on 1 billion devices and Glance would be one of the few platforms in the world that which touch 1 billion people. Now, that's how we think of scale. Anytime we think about scale, it has to get to a disproportionately large portion of the internet users. That's how we think about it. When we get to 1 billion users, I think we would be on a quarter of the internet users of the planet, maybe a little higher. And that's what's exciting. That's what's exciting. And we are creating all of these technologies and phenomena from here. We're not creating them from anywhere else. And that we take a lot of pride in that. And when Piyush, I, Abhay, or Mohit think about scale, we think about what portion of internet can we get to. And I think it's very important for anybody who does creation. We're not faced by what somebody else has to say about our technology, what somebody else has to say about our platform. Not because we don't like to take feedback, don't get me wrong. I think it's important that if you have clarity of vision about something, and if it is really out there, most people will not see it. And that means you're pushing the envelope. And that means when you're pushing the envelope, you will get naysayers, not because they're against you, just that they don't see it. And I think it's at that point you have to essentially stay true to your vision and say, no, I hear you. I think I'm going to stay at it because this is going to happen. And I think that's what creates phenomena in the world. And I think we really like to do that. And we are probably onto that certainly with Glance. We are certainly going to be onto that with what we are trying to do with Ruposo, which is already touched over 50 million people, 50 million users, and on its way to very large numbers over the next few years. So that's how we are, and that's what we'd like to do. And we feel pretty confident about this. The beauty of creation, I'll tell you one more, is you require lesser capital. And if you require lesser capital, if you essentially create something, is because you're creating. You're not trying to outcompete anybody else.
No, very interesting, Naveen. I wanted to just segue into a different part. When I think of the phrase change is the only constant and the importance of persuasive power to carry people along, I think of you and I think of InMobi. And specifically, would love to hear your thoughts on pivots. I know when we had the Mumbai Angels back to you very early, it was called M-Khoj, it was mobile search. I remember early on, the first markets were actually not the US or the Western world, but Singapore and Southeast Asia. And down the line, very recently, you all were the first ad tech B2B unicorn, but you've added Glance and created a second unicorn and now have a full stack, right? Both B2B and B2C. Talk a bit about the evolution of business model, but more importantly, persuading and convincing your backers, Naveen, right? Of course, we were very early on and we backed you. But along the way, when you have a pivot, change in vision, you're expanding your TAMs, the TAM is becoming larger. How do you convince investors who've signed up for something else and suddenly see this? Would love to hear your thoughts, because this is, I think, a hallmark, constant change and believing in seeing the next new thing before others see it and then carrying them along.
Yeah, it's a very important question because I think there are two different points that you asked here. I think one is when you're pivoting and then when you are creating something newer, where your existing thing continues and scales and has to scale at the same pace and you're going to create. I think we pivoted only once, which was at that time when we moved from M-Coach to InMobi. That was a time when I know I had a conversation with all of you. And it was a conversation that I prepared 3 days for, and you guys sent me away in 5 minutes to say, yeah, go ahead, do it. It was because at that point of time, I didn't feel the reason of the pivot at that point. I didn't feel that we were going to succeed, build anything big. I still remember the conversation we had for a few minutes, which was you asked a question to say, hey, there are these three companies that are doing this, then why are you pivoting? And I think my response to that at that time was, I know they're doing it. I know there are a bunch of large VCs who are backing them. I just don't see this as a big market. I can't see it. And if I can't see it, I don't know how to go behind it. And I think your answer was that's a good enough place to be at, because if you don't see it, you're not going to get there. I think we were okay in that decision because the space never became large, like mobile SMS search never became large. So that was the pivot reason. I think when you get to some of these reasons here, I think when you get to a certain scale and size, there is in technology, let me abstract my point out a little bit. In technology, there is nothing called that, oh, because of I have a certain scale, nobody else can touch me, because new technologies come in and they actually create disruption very rapidly. And so the only way to safeguard yourself at a true moat as a technology company, long-term moat, is that you are able to create. And that's becoming visible more and more as we go forward. And so when our advertising business had started to scale and we saw a certain scale and size that we would be at, we realized that in a advertising-led business, if you were to add a consumer component, it solidifies it. Frankly, it becomes a full stack company. Now, that's easier said than done because that's on a paper. The hard part of that is a B2C platform is you don't know whether you'll succeed or not. And so therefore, the thing that we have realized over the last many years is new initiatives are not about capital allocation or large capital allocation. New initiatives, if they are oriented on creating something newer, are based on the quality of people that you can put behind that and keep it really small. So for almost about 2 or 3 years, I would say the glance team, the first 2 or 3, the glance team wasn't more than 10, 12 people, maybe 15. Never went beyond that size because the big things are not created because you put like hundreds of people. It's only when you know that I have to scale it now, you can then put people behind it and try to scale it. And that's been the approach we've had for the longest period of time. We always have few of these woods in the fire. We don't know where they will go, but we think we always can create something interesting in a certain dimension space. We also feel more confident about doing so now. And therefore, these conversations are actually pretty gradual with the backers, with the investors, because we're not necessarily going in there and saying, hey, I am putting 20% of my resources onto something. No, saying, frankly, in the beginning, nobody even knows because you're just putting 5, 10 people onto something. And that if that becomes big, then only you come out and say, hey, I think this is an interesting idea. So the first time we really even talked to the board was when this little thing started to show some legs. And the conversation was much easier at that point of time. It's like, oh, wait a minute. This sounds interesting. It could be big. It could be large. Like, why don't we go ahead a little bit more on it? I think we have had an incremental approach to innovation with big ideas and without massive capital deployment.
No, this is wonderful, Naveen. I wanted to just go into a different part about it, talk a bit about people and partnerships. Specifically, you've been always been playing long-term games with long-term people and would love to hear your thoughts on partnerships first. In this more than 10-year journey, you InMobi landed a big strategic partnership with Google first, and then now most recently with Geo. And you've talked about that. Would love your thoughts, especially for young and aspiring founders where strategic partnerships have become so important. That what are your first principles thoughts on how you partner, how you approach it, what's in it for the other side, how you think about the word win-win? Because clearly there's some first principles thinking and would love to hear on what shaped that, how you and the whole team approach strategic partnerships, not just in India, but all around the world. And you've been doing that right from the time you started to now, the large and growing unicorn and growing even further.
Yeah, absolutely. So partnerships are a big thing for us, by the way, very big thing. You talked about 2 partnerships, Sanjay. Those partnerships converted into investors. But we probably have under our stable close to about 25 mega partnerships that we run at any point of time. We have absolutely and always believed that there is no space to essentially be able to build things just by yourself. And if you especially want to go into global pastures, you want to be able to do these things along with other people. Now it becomes actually easier if you have created new things, because then everybody else wants to also partner with you because you've created something new. We have a very big partnership with Microsoft, for example. We have a huge partnership with Samsung and Xiaomi, and we have partnerships with the likes of Motorola. We have partnerships with the likes of Qualcomm. And it's served us really well because each of these partnerships basically make you strong because you could go deep and you could build those. Now, I think the partnerships required is to leave some value on the table for the other partner. And it also requires that you believe in the partners and the partnership to be able to deliver something. And in all cases, if there are 2 large companies that are going to partner, it is going to be slow. It's not going to be as if, hey, next quarter we're going to do something. So you have to actually have 12 to 24 months in mind to say, if I kick off this partnership today, in 12 to 24 months, we would have a solid partnership in place. And that's how you have to approach it. And I would actually go on also to say, I think a lot of the companies can do a lot more in terms of these strategic partnerships and deep relationships with companies. I see less of them in India happening. I think they should happen a lot more because that's probably the only way in which you can scale non-linearly. Imagine if you do 20 such partnerships, you start of them today, and in 2 years, each of them actually started to contribute. You actually have created a compounding effect of partnerships. And that's what's happened with us. We probably have these 25 partnerships, of which I would say 75% of them are doing really well. They've all were insignificant at some point of time, and they've all now started to contribute. You get to those levels quite distinctly.
Very interesting. Moving to playing long-term games with the other important aspect, which is really people. You've gone on to say that everything else is a commodity. People are the most important and people create the most generational platforms. In our own business also, Karthik, me and all our colleagues, we talk about that we are in a people flow business, not a deal flow business. What venture is, you're really backing teams first. Just share a bit about that. What do you mean when you said everything else is a commodity? This right to play to win, right? To retain the competitive edge. You're always pushing your people. How does that percolate across? Just talk about what you think of the InMobi person and what the culture that you've built and your other fellow leaders have strived.
If you think about any of the great companies that have been created, and if you go through them and look through their history, and you could go as much back as you want, or even in today's times, you would realize that best of the companies have had people who have stayed with them for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And there is a very important reason. And by the way, even in the venture industry, you take your own example, you haven't gone out and like churned people like annually or every 2 years. You have same set of people. You may add more. You've had a similar set of people. If you take any venture fund, they stay together for 20, 30 years and then they start to dismantle because they are now don't want to do this anymore. But any organization that wants to be institutional and wants to create something that lives beyond them needs to essentially focus on having people that share the vision, share the purpose, and are also happy being with you. And I think that's what we focused on. I think on one hand, we focused on saying that, look, if you are with us, we're going to play a long game, and we're going to play a long game to create a new internet world out there that's not been created before. And if you're interested in that worldview, be with us. And there are people who like that, and there are people who don't like it. And if those, I'm more interested in people who like it, because that's what matters. So that's on one hand. And we do anything and everything to make that happen for that group. On the other hand, we also talk about to say, if you are here, we want you to be happy. We want to care for you. And we want to essentially make sure that you're trusted both ways. And I think those two things at times are seen as things that cannot necessarily go together. And I think what we have been trying to prove and showcase that you can live these two worlds. On one hand, you can win and build something great and build something big, yet have care for your people, have your people happy, have them live a full life, both at the same time. You don't need to churn through people to try and build something great, because that actually never happens. You get a sense that it's happening. And similarly, if your people are happy, that doesn't mean they're slacking. That's just an odd concept. If people are happy, they actually do more work. So somewhere, I think these two things come together, and that's what we've been trying to live and showcase. We'll see when the next several years. It's been working well for us for the last decade for sure. We've had people in the organization, almost about 400 odd people, maybe 500, who have spent a considerable amount of time with us. I'll give you one interesting fact. If I take my top 100 people, I would say about 70-80% of them have spent at least more than 5-7 years with me. Now, what is the impact of that? The impact of that is that when I think about an expansion, I don't need to essentially go look around elsewhere. I just have to look inside the organization and look at somebody and say, hey, would you be keen on doing this? And they put their hand up and they go about and get it done in most cases. And the reason why that's exciting is because they know who we are and we know who they are. And so there is this trust that gets created. And so what people don't realize is the compounding of trust. The compounding of trust is what leads to compounding of business. And I think that is what we are really going for this compounding of trust, both ways, by the way. Both ways, because as a company we gain, but as individuals, they also gain, because they would hopefully, and more often than not, will get opportunities that would be of a different magnitude. That somebody else would give it to them for sure because they're good, but they would need to spend a few years there to gain their trust, because nobody gives you the most important piece when you arrive, not because you're not capable. People give you big things to do because they can trust you. I think there's a confusion about capability and trust. Capability is there, trust gets built, and it takes time. So I just think this compounding of trust is a very powerful concept both ways, and I try to do whatever I could to essentially continue to compound it.
Naveen, very interesting. You've created two unicorns, and in one sense, your backers, of course, back you for the compounding of returns and of wealth creation. But here we find ourselves talking about compounding of trust and about building a very loyal but high-performing people base. I think very often some folks will confuse, right? And say that, okay, if you're a nice person, then you're not necessarily playing to win. Or if you're playing to win, you don't play win-win, right? You play win-lose. But I think what you said is that if you build, very interesting to note, if you build a culture of compounding trust, then you have immense employee loyalty. As we just wrap and segue, I wanted to move to InMobi culture, as you're known as InMobians. You've been known for supporting your alums. That this is something that's also close to Blume's heart. We call it long-term founder value. As you and I have had a long marriage, more than a decade. When the fund managers sign up and your colleagues sign up, it's also very long-term because they're signing up for multiple funds, right? Not just one fund. It's truly institutional. You've got quite a few ex-InMobians who've left, right? Atul Satish at Nudge, Anurag at Club, our own very own dear Amit Gupta, Gautam at Springboard. What drives you InMobians to support them? Why do they come back to y'all? You've heard of a lot of famous alumni networks, but share about why that's so important to you versus thinking about, on the other hand, all right, if they want to go and build, let them build on their own. Why should I support? Why do you care about it? And how do you develop that culture that they keep coming back to you, Naveen?
I think if I fundamentally believe relationships are built for life. Now, at a part of that journey, you may be with us and may not be with us. And you don't want to seem transactional. Transactional relationships are not what builds trust. So if you go deeper into that, you'd realize that if I were to essentially treat people great while they're with us and treat them not that well when they're not with us, then when they are with us, they know this is just because I am in the system that I should be treated well. As soon as I go out of the system, they don't matter. And I think that's wrong because we are humans and humans fundamentally care about safety. As human beings, we care about deep emotions. We care about a lot of these very important things that matter to us. We care about friends. We care about family. And so therefore, what we are trying to say is if you've been through the system of InMobi, more often than not, we do make our mistakes, by the way, but more often than not, you've been part of this family and you shall remain part of this one. And we shall support you in whatever endeavor you're going to try and do. Now, if that endeavor is starting a company, so be it. We'll support that. If that endeavor is going and doing something else, because this is not an exciting place, that's fine. We will make the right calls to make sure that you're at the right place. Now, what happens as a result of this? As a result of this, what happens is that when somebody is thinking about leaving, they actually don't call us when they have left or when they're halfway out of the door. They tell us when they're thinking about it. Many a times, by the way, maybe about 70, 80% of the time, the issue is small that I can fix immediately. If many times when they have to leave, then they go see the world outside. In many cases, they come back. Our doors are open. They come back. Now, 25% of my leadership team has returned back. They've seen the world outside and have come back, which basically means that for me, it's clear that this is their home. For them, it's clear that this is their home. And that's what you want to do. You want to have people in places when they realize that this is the place that treats me with respect, gives me the trust, cares for me. And these are the simple things that people just want to know in life. So we can talk about developing technologies. We can talk about creating value, getting valuations, IPO, no IPO, sale, etc. All of those things don't matter. They matter. They are slightly more superficial. And so we do try to go one level deeper and try our best to do it. COVID hasn't really necessarily helped as much just because it's harder to connect with people. But yeah, we're going to try our best to continue to maintain that. And look, it's been hard because these things are not necessarily the ones that get talked about in the boardrooms or you hear about them, because a lot of what's written in the books are people management skills or people management philosophies that were built for a different generation, not for knowledge generation, in my view, not for generation that we are living in. And therefore, some of those things one could not apply them.
Very interesting, Naveen. One last question before we move to a final and last section. It's a tough market today. Naveen, in the US, winter is almost here, but winter has figuratively been here for the ecosystem for a while. I know in our past interactions, you often advise founders who are raising capital, raise capital when it's available, right? You've said things like this. Would love to hear, you've got Mithril today, SoftBank, Kleiner Perkins. Your advice to founders who are raising and just constructing and managing their cap tables, right? What is that founder investor dynamic like? How has that changed? And what's your advice to them, your learnings from your own lengthy experience now, more than a decade, Naveen, on what you share and advise founders who are raising?
Yeah, look, I think few things are becoming very clear in the last few years. Capital led businesses haven't succeeded. And there have been so many businesses that have raised hundreds of billions of dollars. And the returns are not proportionate, neither for the company, not for the founders, not for the employees, certainly not for the investors. I think what's really changing now, is becoming very clear, is that you have to have a real business. You have to have a real business. The gimmick's over. The game's over of buying revenue. The game's over of just inflated user base through marketing. All of those things are just over, which is great for people who build real businesses. And so, therefore, I think what's really happening now is one, the time for like true entrepreneurship is there to really build solid companies. So that's one. I think second, losses are, of course, any business to scale requires loss. But I think the need to have a path to profitability, and not as a cliched statement, but actually something that you as a founder really know that you can get to, is actually very key. And you just would know. I think there's a distinction between a great consumer service or a great service versus a great business model. You have to have both. You can't just have one and then hope for the business model to fall. That never happens. So I think the business model clarity for the founder themselves should be there. Because what's not going to happen is that your business model would hope to convert into a great business model on its own because you've raised a lot of money and you've spent a lot of money. It's not going to happen. It doesn't happen. So therefore comes the last point around fundraise. Your fundraise needs to be a lot more thoughtful because free money is not there anymore. The big players who would just pump in money for whatever be the reason isn't there anymore. You can read the news and almost all of them have just wiped out. And so that's also not going to happen where your businesses just continue to just get put a lot of capital. And so therefore you have to be very thoughtful. And I think an interesting thing in all of this is one should think about long-term compounding of businesses. There is no need to rush. There is this mad rush of like massive scaling, blitz scaling, or whatever people would call it. I don't know why that was ever needed and why that's even needed now. Because businesses are not built to be sold, firstly. They should be built to last. When a child grows, you don't want the child to be 6 feet tall when he's 7 years old. You want the child to be 6 feet tall when maybe he's 18. There is a gradual, at 18 when he's 6 feet tall, it's great. It's like he's really tall. So businesses are like that. You can't just say, hey, let me just grow the business like overnight. And let me just do everything to just like be the only player in the market, get 100% market share, winner take all. None of that is true. It's not true. And so therefore, I think compounding of the businesses in the early years at about 100%. And when you get to scale, compound them at about 50%. And if you do that for 10 years, you have a business of a phenomenal size with the right unit economics. You don't have to do like faster growth. Now, investors who could come in and ask you for a faster growth, just say no. Just say, I'm going to grow at 40, 50%. It's fine. Nobody's going to fire you. Nobody's going to do anything. Don't fall for this rapid growth narrative that's just been out there. And therefore, now comes the fundraise part. Then just raise less amount of money. You don't need that much money. If you can just solve for some of these things, you don't need too much money. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars is fine. You should raise it if you're getting it, but don't use it then. Try use less of it.
Very interesting. I think one of the key takeaways I'm getting is purely capital intensive businesses that were growing at the expense of, right? That's number one. And the other, I think the two keywords are really the compounding of trust and the compounding of business, right? If you have those as winning combinations, you've got people who are compounding themselves and of course the businesses, but at a healthy and not a crazy, unsustainable rate. Naveen, we're moving to a rapid fire. So it's a fun, let's try this.
I've gone on record to say I hate rapid fires, but why don't you shoot few?
Let's dive into it. What would you order for your last ever meal?
Dal chawal. I am a big fan of like Indian food. I love that. So I'm just going to go for simple dal chawal.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Current book or favorite book of all time?
There have been few. Hard Things About Hard Things is one of those.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. A great piece of advice you've gotten.
Yeah, I've gotten few advices, I would say. I think one, let me try and articulate this. The most important advice that I got was there will be a lot of people who will not see the vision that you have. Beauty is in not trying to please everybody. You should listen to everybody. The beauty is in staying true to your vision, despite a lot of people coming and not agreeing with you. And to me, that was just the most beautiful thing that I ever heard. And it stayed with me for long.
Beautifully said. Quote unquote, favorite failure, most valuable learning. Maybe there's a bit in what you said, but if there's anything new you'd like to add.
Yeah, look, there was a product that we launched. It was called Meep. We launched it in 2015. I think it was a spectacular failure, public failure. And you got to take it on the chin. As simple as that.
I remember being there. That was close to the 10x, the 10-year anniversary, but all of you all just picked yourself, dusted yourself off and just moved on.
Yeah, and we created Glance after that.
Last fun one. Favorite way to unwind after a long day?
I love to watch sports. So that was my favorite way to do it. And I love F1. I love cricket. I would just watch sports most of the days. Towards the end of the day, I would watch some sports, even if it's highlights or even it's recorded. I just end up watching some bit of it.
This is wonderful. There could be a separate section on just the learnings and the takeaways and the synergies from sports and sports champions and sport leaders on entrepreneurship.
There are so many, the success and the failures in sports is so high and so rapid. The success and failures are so high and so rapid that it's just a beautiful thing to see how sportsmen come out of it next day and then yet again go for it and then maybe fail again, but yet again go for it. So it's just a beautiful experience.
Absolutely. I'm forgetting the name of the book, but Sir Alex Ferguson, I think, is teaching at HBS, right? The book that he co-authored with Michael Moritz, who are both sirs. I think it's called Leadership, and it's exactly about a storied venture capitalist interviewing Sir Alex about the lessons from sports to management. So that's wonderful. Naveen, just wanted to thank you. It was an absolute pleasure. So very special for you to be here with us. Thanks for coming out the time. And next time, whenever we do it next, we'll try and do it in person in India, at your HQ here in San Francisco, maybe on a long plane flight if you're sitting together. That may be one of the most interesting, innovative ways to do it. But thanks for making the time.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Sanjay, for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be speaking with you.
Thank you for checking out X Unicorns. This podcast is proudly a Blume Ventures offering, led by my marketing team colleagues Mesha Bhansali and Disha Sharma. Our sound engineer is Sanjay Tewari and our producer is Vedant Naik of Manicpod Studios.